welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, last weekend I watched Batman v Superman the Ultimate Edition, and I really love this film. In fact, it's growing on me more and more. Each time I watch it, I love it more and more. And so I got on social media and I posted about how much I love this film. And man, the backlash I got was kind of surprising. But I think people aren't really giving this movie a fair shot. And I think there's a whole lot of things that are clouding people's perceptions of this movie. In fact, I think Batman v Superman the Ultimate Edition is probably the best comic book movie, or one of the best comic book movies of the last 10 years. It is certainly one of the most underrated comic book movies of recent memory, largely due to the original hype around the theatrical release, which I think, to be fair, was probably deserved. I think there's a couple of factors at play here. Number one, you've got to watch the Ultimate Edition. The theatrical release was nowhere near as good. They cut out half an hour of footage, and that footage wasn't actually superfluous. That footage was essential to building the plot in a really coherent and strong kind of way. I still enjoyed the theatrical movie, but the Ultimate Edition is so much better, and the studios really did make a mess of the version that they released. So you've got to watch the Ultimate Edition, that's number one. Don't watch the theatrical release, watch the Ultimate Edition. The other thing that I think is clouding the issue here is what I call Marvel fever. Now, Marvel fever is due to the fact that we're just bombarded with Marvel movies now all of the time. And Marvel don't really make comic book movies. What Marvel do is they make action movies starring comic book characters, and they are really good at it. Generally speaking, most of their movies are pretty enjoyable. For me, I think one of my favorites is still Captain America Winter Soldier. But it's a great example of taking a comic book character and creating what is effectively almost like a Bourne Identity James Bond spy thriller using comic book characters. And they are really great and enjoyable films, but they're not authentic and true comic book movies. What Zack Snyder is doing with his films, these DC movies, is he's actually trying to make comic book films, and I think there's a big difference there. And with the DC comics, and particularly The Dark Knight, they are going to have a darker tone, and a lot of people just, I think they aren't handling that, they don't like it, and because of that personal preference, they allow that personal preference to really bias their view of a lot of these films. But in actual fact, what Zack Snyder is doing here is he is being consistent with those Dark Knight graphic novels. The other thing that I think has muddied the waters a little bit is that I've seen a lot of criticism floating around, and I don't think it's fair at all, but the criticism basically goes like this. Zack Snyder is really good at making amazing images appear on screen. He's really great with the graphic content, or seeing, beautiful, rich frames that appear in front of you that are almost artistic in what they portray. But the problem is, that's not good storytelling, because there's no storytelling substance. It's just a whole lot of images and graphics and really beautiful, cool looking stuff being thrown at you on screen, and there's no story to underpin it. Well, I completely disagree with that. If you were talking about George Lucas and the prequels, you'd be right. George Lucas and the prequels was a classic example of doing this, of these rich frames that were full of content, but there was no story substance to actually back it up. It was just, you were being shown visuals for the sake of being shown visuals. Michael Bay is another one who's notorious for doing this with the Transformer films. Just these visuals for the sake of visuals. But in actual fact, what Zack Snyder is doing here is he is telling a comic book story. And one of the strengths of comic book storytelling is the visual image, especially when it comes to The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight graphic novels are renowned, no matter what story it is or who the author and illustrator are. The graphic content, the actual visual image, the artistry that's involved in making those visual images is a huge part of the renown of the Dark Knight graphic novels. And so, once again, this is a classic example of Zack Snyder being consistent with that. And what he's doing is he's actually doing what good comic books do. He's using visual images as a storytelling medium. They are loaded with all sorts of storytelling plot points. That opening sequence with the death of Bruce Wayne's parents, probably one of the best death of Bruce Wayne's parents ever put on screen. And it is content rich. Now, that whole entire sequence, which lasts for several minutes, not a single word apart from one word, the word Martha, which is uttered by his father as he is dying and is essential to the building of the rest of the plot of Batman v Superman. That's the only word that's uttered in that whole sequence. And yet there is an amazing, rich plot development and story sequence which unfolds all through the use of the visual artistic storytelling medium. That's not bad filmmaking, that is excellent filmmaking. That's not substituting, visual trickery for story substance. That's using visual artistry to tell the story. That's quite a different thing. That whole opening sequence is actually quite amazing when you stop and think about it. And it's a really beautiful and engaging sequence to watch. Now, he's got a lot of them like that in Batman v Superman, the Ultimate Edition. There are some flaws though. No movie is perfect, and this film is by no means perfect. I think some of the things that really didn't need to be in there were some of the Easter eggs. And now there's no doubting that Marvel does their Easter eggs, generally speaking, a lot better than what DC has done them or other comic book movies have done them so far. And the Easter eggs in this film, they are setting up future movies. They have nothing to do really with the plot of this film. They don't need to be there. Some of the dream sequences in particular involving Bruce Wayne, they just didn't need to be in this film. But other than that, they are minor complaints, because when you watch this film, and you've got to watch the Ultimate Edition, and you've got to stop thinking of it as a Marvel or an alternate version of Marvel movie making. It's a completely different type of filmmaking. It's not the same sort of thing, and it's going to tell the stories in a different way. And something that Zack Snyder is really good at is taking comic book movies, or taking comic books, particularly those with darker themes. Think of stuff like The Watchmen, The 300, and actually adapting them in a way that is consistent with how comic books, particularly those darker comic books, tell their stories, and he actually does a really good job at it. So Batman v Superman, I really love it. I love the Ultimate Edition, and I'm glad they released it. They effectively did a Watchmen on him. The director's cut of The Watchmen is far better than the theatrical release, and the Ultimate Edition is far better than the theatrical release of Batman v Superman. So if you haven't seen it already, and you weren't 100% impressed with Batman v Superman, then you've definitely got to check out the Ultimate Edition. Thanks for watching. See you next time on Left Foot Media.